Hi, Zena from Geek Alley here, and today we're going to be talking about my personal favorite color to use in watercolor because it's very versatile, and that's going to be Payne's Gray. So Payne's Gray is typically the darkest color that I use in my watercolor work, and it's also a very versatile color to use for mixing. And Payne's Gray is a mixture of other colors, so it's not its own pigment, it is a mixture of other colors. So I thought it'd be fun to swatch a little bit of this color and try to mix our own using some colors I already have. So Payne's Gray originated, I believe it was in the 1800s, from artist William Payne, who wanted a different alternative to black. So we're going to use a little Payne's Gray that I have squeezed out here in my palette. And I'm just using a number 8 sable brush, as well as a sheet of 100% cotton watercolor paper. This is a rather thin sheet of watercolor paper that I'm only experimenting with a little bit, so we'll kind of see how that goes. And then I do have some mixing wells that are relatively clean here on the right when we get to mixing our color. So first, let's just try the bottle Payne's Gray. So the bottle I have is from Winsor & Newton's Cotman line, which is technically their student grade line, but I actually prefer that to their professional series. And we see that we get a nice gray that is slightly bluish toned, and it does make a really good mixing gray. I love mixing it with greens to get the dark greens that I use on trees. You'll see that very frequently in my paintings. You can kind of see here that we have that bluish gray tone, typically the darkest color used. So just to compare, I have a little bit of Cotman Lamp Black. I feel like this paper is not as absorbent as I was expecting it to be for being 100% cotton. I find the Lamp Black to be more of a flat color. I really only use this very occasionally. I've never bought black, it just came in this set that I have here. You can kind of see that we do get that cooler tone there from the Payne's Gray. So I looked up the pigment code on Winsor & Newton's website, and it said that this Payne's Gray is made up of a mixture of phthalo blue, ultramarine, and lamp black. Now, traditionally, William Payne used crimson lake, Prussian blue, and yellow ochre. So I do have crimson lake and yellow ochre, and I don't have Prussian blue, but I think phthalo blue is pretty close. So we're going to try seeing if we can get like a replicated shade using Winsor & Newton's recipe, and then also using like the traditional recipe. So I'm going to grab a little of I have Daniel Smith phthalo blue, Daniel Smith French ultramarine, and a little lamp black. So it's almost kind of just a very dark blue according to this recipe. And I did not pre-wet my paint, so they're a little dry. And I don't really know the ratio, so we're just going to kind of test it out. So there's my two blues. That ultramarine is very, very vivid. And I did just a touch of the lamp black, but lamp black is like such a powerful color that it kind of took over. But I can kind of see just from my consistency of the paint here on the well that this looks pretty close to what I would expect from Payne's Gray. And my recipe might have been a little on the cool side versus the original, or the like bottle tube here. But I would say that's pretty close here. You can probably add a little bit more of the lamp black or a little bit less of the French ultramarine and get pretty close to that bottle. So if you are looking for Payne's Gray, but you don't have it, it is apparently pretty easy to mix up, or mix up something at least pretty close. I just added a little more of the lamp black. And I would say that one is pretty close to what we got from the straight Payne's Gray from the tube. Pretty close. I might have mixed a little bit too much lamp black. Just a recap here was the Payne's Gray straight from the Winsor & Newton tube. There is lamp black just to compare, and these are my own mixing, and we mix phthalo blue, French ultramarine, and lamp black to get that. So the original recipe for Payne's Gray was apparently Crimson Lake, yellow ochre, and Prussian blue. I don't have yellow ochre in a tube, but I do have it here on these dry sheets from Peerless. So we're going to try using these Peerless colors to mix, because that one I think has the other colors we need. So I've never tried mixing these Peerless colors, so let's see how this goes. There is our Scarlet Lake. That was it looks very different than this other Scarlet Lake I have. I feel like the other Scarlet Lake I have is a little cooler. Alright, now we're going to grab some of that yellow ochre. The phthalo blue, it does have cobalt blue. Maybe we'll try the cobalt blue just for fun, because that's what we have. And that looks pretty close, I feel like, to what I'm familiar with. I'm not the best in color theory. I'm kind of a new color theory student, which is why I wanted to make this video, to kind of work on my color theory. So this one is a little green. I maybe change up my ratio just a little bit, but I still feel like we're getting a good mix there. I can definitely see the intention. I don't know if that is because of the blue I'm using. I'm going to add just a little bit more of that cobalt. And I feel like we are at a decent representation. I also want to try it using the other colors I have. So I do have this Crimson Lake from Holbein. I had to get a new palette because I ran out of space. So I do have a new big palette coming, hopefully in a couple days. So we're just squeezing straight from the tube here. And I don't have yellow ochre, but I feel like New Gamboge is reasonably close. Yellow ochre is a little bit of a darker yellow. And I read online that the closest to that Prussian blue would be the phthalo blue. I'm making all sorts of noises, knocking stuff. My apologies. Still getting used to my filming setup I have here. Alright. And we're just going to get... Ugh. again, very green. I think I'm using a little too much of the yellow. I might need a little more of the red to kind of tone that down. Because that is like very green turquoise. Of course, you can't even see here. That is a very green turquoise-ish color. It might be hard to see on the camera, but we're going to add a little bit more of that Crimson Lake to try to get it a little bit closer to the Payne's gray. There, we're very purpley. I am not a master at color mixing here. And we're just going to try to see if we can get something reasonably close. I'm wondering if my colors I'm using are just not jiving with each other how I want them to. Alright, just going back and forth with the colors until we get something a little close. I know this isn't super close, but I'm just going to go ahead and swatch this and call this a lesson in color theory. Actually, I think that was a pretty good attempt. I don't know the ratio I used. I started with equal and then definitely had to go back and add more of the Scarlet Lake. But I would say the original recipe of the yellow ochre, I used phthalo blue and the Crimson Lake is pretty good. I'd say these, as I said, Nuke and Bouge here. But I feel like that came out pretty darn close to what we had in the tube. So I'm definitely a fan of mixing my own Payne's gray. So there's one more color I wanted to take a look at, and that is Jane's Gray. Jane's Gray is very similar to Payne's Gray. So Jane's Gray was created for another artist's kind of signature mixture. So Jane's Gray, I'm just pulling up the exact color facts, are going to be a mixture of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. So I do have some Jane's Gray, and then we'll try also mixing up our own Jane's Gray. So the Jane's Gray I have is from Peerless. So here's what it looks like swatched. I think it is a little bit even bluer than Payne's Gray. It looks very brown here dried, but on the swatch side it looks a little more blue than the Payne's Gray. So let's go ahead and swatch out our Peerless Jane's Gray. And we will separate Jane a little bit over here. Ooh, that's almost like an indigo. Or I have Delft Blue. I feel like that looks pretty close. That is a nice mixture. It is a lot more blue than I was expecting for it being called gray. I want to swatch that, kind of compare to, I have this Delft blue color that I use frequently as like a very dark blue jean blue. Just to compare. The Delft blue is definitely cooler. But those are pretty close. Let's try making Jane's Gray using the original recipe. So I'm going to wipe out a little spot here in our mixing tray. So from Daniel Smith, it says that Jane's Gray was created for artist Jane Blundell, who used ultramarine And burnt sienna, she wanted an alternative to phthalo blue because that phthalo blue is very staining. So we're gonna start with just a tiny bit of Holbein burnt sienna. I have a feeling that it's going to be a very small amount of burnt sienna compared to the amount of French ultramarine. But French ultramarine is a very vivid color. There is my burnt sienna. You can see that's a nice kind of warm brown. And this is a very, I'm not sure if ultramarine blue and French ultramarine are the same, but we will try it out. Like I said, we are on a journey of color theory. I am brand new to discovering color theory and what goes behind some of these colors other than the name on the bottle. All right, let's try that mixture. And we're going to compare it to this one up here. We might need a little bit more. This actually looks more like the Payne's gray. This is pretty close. So apparently French ultramarine and burnt sienna will also get you to Payne's gray, or at least a pretty close approximation. I'm going to try adding a little bit more of that ultramarine. I feel like what we're getting from this is a lot different than the Peerless Jane's Gray. I don't know if that's different formulation. Or if it's because I'm using French ultramarine. Let's try adding a little bit more. Now I feel like we basically just have French ultramarine. Let's try just getting a little bit of that burnt sienna back in our palette. And going back in, I'm going to get it from my palette versus from the tube this time, just so I don't have to keep going back. And I am really liking the color mixture this is giving me. But I do feel like this is pretty darn close to that Payne's gray. This one is almost a little bit more turquoisey. This was our original Jane's Gray from Peerless. But I don't know, I'm liking it. Right, so these are some different variations of our mixtures of that Payne's gray and Jane's gray over here. And this is a very versatile color. It is a beautiful mixing color. Just to give you a little bit of an idea on how to use this, I'm going to take some of my sap green. And we get a nice, very warm green. And we can mix that with a little bit of the Payne's gray. And we get this beautiful kind of darker, great for those shadows on tree branches. Get that even darker. And I feel like it's more versatile to use as a mixing than when you're using straight black. So you can kind of see here. Somehow we can use that gray. And now just to kind of compare, if I were to mix the sap green with straight black, just a tiny bit of black really overtakes my green very quickly. And I think it gives us a little bit of a flatter color. And this is going to be very like non-granulating, very like solid color, which sometimes is good, but I just prefer using that slightly lighter, not as deep mixing tool. Something like neutral tint and Payne's gray are great to have in your mixing arsenal. They are also fun colors to use by themselves. If I'm doing like a wooded scene, especially like a wintry mountain scene, might do some Payne's gray trees. I've used Payne's gray for a night sky. It is a versatile color. But as we learned today, not a pigment in its own. It is a mixture of a few different colors. I think the most successful mixture that we did was the ultramarine and burnt sienna. That was a very nice mixture here. And I also really liked when we mixed the Crimson Lake with the phthalo blue and the new gamboge. It took a little trial and error there on getting that mixture, but it ended up looking pretty nice once we got that. So here was a little lesson as I'm learning as well on one of my favorite colors. If you enjoyed this little study into Payne's gray, please let me know if you'd like to see episodes on other colors. Thanks for watching.